双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
A Bundle of Ballads. Edited by Henry Morley. Contents. Introduction. Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase, the later version. The Nut Brown Maid. Adam Bell. Clym of the Clough. And William of Cloudesley. Binnery. King Cophetua and the Beggar Maid. Take thy old cloak about thee. Willow. 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 The Little Wee Man. The Spanish Lady's Love. Edward. Edward. Robin Hood. King Edward IV. And the Tanner of Tamworth. Sir Patrick Spens. Edom O. Gordon. The Children in the Wood. The Beggar's Daughter of Bethnal Green. The Bailiff's Daughter of Islington. Barbara Allen's Cruelty. Sweet William's Ghost. The Braes o' Yarrow.
Kemp o' Wine.
Ower. The Water to Charlie. Admiral Hosier's Ghost. Jemmy Dawson. William and Margaret. Elfinland Wood. Casabianca. Auld Robin Gray.
Glossary.
Introduction by the editor. Recitation with dramatic energy by men whose business it was to travel from one great house to another and delight the people by the way, was usual among us from the first. The Scop invented, and the gleeman recited heroic legends and other tales to our Anglo-Saxon forefathers. These were followed by the minstrels and other tellers of tales written for the people. They frequented fairs and merrymakings, spreading the knowledge not only of tales in prose or ballad form, but of appeals also to public sympathy from social reformers. As late as the year 1822, Allan Cunningham, in publishing a collection of traditional tales of the English and Scottish peasantry, spoke from his own recollection of itinerant storytellers who were welcomed in the houses of the peasantry and earned a living by their craft. The earliest storytelling was in recitative, when the old alliteration passed on into rhyme, and the crowd or rustic fiddle took the place of the old glee beam for accentuation of the measure and the meaning of the song. We come to the ballad singer as Philip Sidney knew him. Sidney said, in his Defense of Poesy, that he never heard the old song of Percy and Douglas, that he found not his heart moved more than with a trumpet, and yet, he said, it is sung but by some blind crowder, with no rougher voice than rude style, which being so evil apparelled in the dust and cobweb of that uncivil age, what would it work trimmed in the gorgeous eloquence of Pindar? Many an old ballad, instinct with natural feeling, has been more or less corrupted by bad ear or memory among the people upon whose lips it has lived. It is to be considered, however, that the old broader pronunciation of some letters developed some syllables and the swiftness of speech slurred over others, which will account for many an apparent halt in the music of what was actually, on the lips of the ballad singer, a good metrical line. Chevy Chase is, most likely, a corruption of the French word chevaucher, which meant a dash over the border for destruction and plunder within the English pale. Chevaucher was the French equivalent to the Scottish border raid. Close relations between France and Scotland arose out of their common interest in checking movements towards their conquest by the kings of England, and many French words were used with a homely turn in Scottish common speech. Even that national source of joy, great chieftain of the pudding race, the haggis, has its name from the French hatchies. At the end of the old ballad of Chevy Chase, which reads the corrupted word into a new sense, as the hunting on the Cheviot Hills, there is an identifying of the hunting of the Cheviot with the Battle of Audubon. Old men that know in the ground well enough call it the Battle of Audubon. At Audubon began this spurn upon a Monday. There was the doughty Douglas slain. The Percy never went away. The Battle of Audubon was fought on the 19th of August, 1388. The Scots were to muster at Jedburgh for a raid into England. The Earl of Northumberland and his sons, learning the strength of the Scottish gathering, resolved not to oppose it, but to make a counter-raid into Scotland. The Scots heard of this and divided their force. The main body, under Archibald Douglas and others, rode for Carlisle. a detachment of 300 or 400 men-at-arms and 2,000 combatants, partly archers, rode for Newcastle and Durham, with James Earl of Douglas for one of their leaders. These were already pillaging and burning in Durham when the Earl of Northumberland first heard of them, and sent against them his sons Henry and Ralph Percy. In a hand-to-hand fight between Douglas and Henry Percy, Douglas took Percy's pennon. At Audubon the Scots overcame the English, but Douglas fell, struck by 3 spears at once, and Henry was captured in fight by Lord Montgomery. There was a Scots ballad on the Battle of Audubon quoted in 1549 in a book, The Complaint of Scotland, that also referred to the Huntes of Chevet. The older version of Chevy Chase is in an Ashmole MS in the Bodleian, from which it was first printed in 1719 by Thomas Hearne in his edition of William of Newbury's History. Its author turns the tables on the Scots with the suggestion of the comparative wealth of England and Scotland in men of the stamp of Douglas and Percy. The later version, which was once known more widely, is probably not older than the time of James I, and is the version praised by Addison in numbers 70 and 74 of The Spectator. The Nut Brown Maid, in which we can hardly doubt that a woman pleads for women, was first printed in 1502 in Richard Arnold's Chronicle. Nut brown was the old word for brunette. There was an old saying that a nut brown girl is neat and blithe by nature. Adam Bell, Clym of the Cloth, and William of Cloudesley was first printed by Copeland about 1550. A fragment has been found of an earlier impression. Laneham, in 1575, in his Kenilworth letter, included Adam Bell, Clym of the Cloth, and William of Cloudesley among the light reading of Captain Cox. In the books of the Stationers' Company, for the printing and editing of which we are deeply indebted to Professor Arbour, there is an entry between July 1557 and July 1558 to John Kinge to print this book called Adam Bell etc., and for his license he giveth to the house. On the 15th of January 1581 to 2, Adam Bell is included in a list of 40 or more copyrights transferred from Sampson Audley to John Charlwood. 100 Merry Tales and Gower's Confessio Amantes being among the other transfers. On the 16th of August, 1586, the Company of Stationers allowed Vina Edward White for his copies these 5 ballades so that they be tolerable. For only are named, one being A Ballad of William Cloudesley, never printed before. Drayton wrote in the Shepherd's Garland in 1593, Come sit we down under this hawthorn tree, the morrow's light shall lend us day enough, and tell a tale of Gawain or Sir Guy, of Robin Hood, or of good Clem of the Cloth. Ben Jonson, in his Alchemist, acted in 1610, also indicates the current popularity of this tale. When Face, the housekeeper, brings Dapper, the lawyer's clerk, to Subtle, and recommends him with Slight, I bring you no cheating Clem, o' the Cloth or Claribel. Binnery, or The Two Sisters, is a ballad on an old theme popular in Scandinavia as well as in this country. There have been many versions of it. Dr. Rimbault published it from a broadside dated 1656. The version here given is Sir Walter Scott's, from his Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border, with a few touches from other versions given in Professor Francis James Child's noble edition of the English and Scottish popular ballads, which, when complete, will be the chief storehouse of our ballad lore. King Cophetua and the Beggar Maid is referred to by Shakespeare in Love's Labour's Lost, Act 4, SCI, in Romeo and Juliet, Act 2,
SCI,
and in 2, Henry IV, Act 3, SC4. It was first printed in 1612 in Richard Johnson's Crown Garland of Golden Roses Gathered Out of England's Royal Garden, being the lives and strange fortunes of many great personages of this land, set forth in many pleasant new songs and sonnets never before imprinted. Take Thy Old Cloak About Thee was published in 1719 by Allan Ramsay in his Tea Table Miscellany, and was probably a 16th century piece retouched by him. Iago sings the last stanza but one, King Stephen was a worthy peer, etc. In Othello, Act 2, SC 3. In Othello, Act 4, SC 3. There is also reference to the old ballad of Willow. Willow, Willow. The Little Wee Man is a wee ballad that is found in many forms with a little variation. It improves what was best in the opening of a longer piece which introduced popular prophecies, and is to be found in Cotton MS. Julius A.V. It was printed by Thomas Wright in his edition of Langtoft's Chronicle, 2. 452. The Spanish Lady's Love was printed by Thomas Deloney in The Garland of Goodwill, published in the latter half of the 16th century. The hero of this ballad was probably one of Essex's companions in the Cadiz expedition, and various attempts have been made to identify him, especially with a Sir John Ball of Thorpe Hall, Lincolnshire. Edward is from Percy's Relics. Percy had it from Lord Hailey's. Robin Hood is the Lytell Jest of Robin Hood, printed in London by Wincond Ward, and again in Edinburgh by Chapman and Miller in 1508, in the first year of the establishment of a printing press in Scotland. King Edward IV and the Tanner of Tamworth is a ballad of a kind once popular. There were King Alfred and the Neat Herd, King Henry and the Miller, King James I and the Tinker, King Henry VII and the Cobbler, with a dozen more. The Tanner of Tamworth in another, perhaps older,
form,
as The King and the Barker, was printed by Joseph Ritson in his Ancient Popular Poetry. Sir Patrick Spens was first published by Percy in his Relics of Ancient English Poetry, 1757. It was given by Sir Walter Scott in his Minstrelsy of the Border, and with more detail by Peter Buchan in his Ancient Ballads of the North. Buchan took it from an old blind ballad singer who had recited it for 50 years, and learned it in youth from another very old man. The ballad is upon an event in Scottish history of the 13th century, touching marriage of a Margaret, daughter of the King of Scotland, to Heningdo, son of the King of Norway. The perils of a winter sea passage in ships of the olden time were recognized by an act of the reign of James III of Scotland, prohibiting all navigation frae the feast of St. Simon's Day and Jude unto the feast of the purification of Our Lady, called Candlemas. Edom O. Gordon was first printed at Glasgow by Robert and Andrew Foulis in 1755. Percy ascribed its preservation to Sir David Dalrymple, who gave it from the memory of a lady. The incident was transferred to the border from the north of Scotland. Edom O. Gordon was Sir Adam Gordon of Auchendown, Lieutenant Depute for Queen Mary in the north in 1571. He sent Captain Kerr with soldiers against the castle of Towie, which was set on fire, and the Lady of Towie, with 26 other persons, was cruelly burnt to the death. Other forms of the ballad ascribed the deed, with incidents of greater cruelty, to Captain Carr, the Lord of Estertown. The Children in the Wood was entered in the books of the Stationers' Company on the 15th of October, 1595 to Thomas Millington as, for his copy Vendertich, E.H. Andes of Boda, the Warden's a ballad intituled, The Norfolk Gent his Will and Testament, and how he committed the keeping of his children to his own brother, who dealt most wickedly with them, and how God plagued him for it. It was printed as a black-letter ballad in 1670. Addison wrote a paper on it in The Spectator, number 85, praising it as one of the darling songs of the common people. The Blind Beggar of Bednall Green is in many collections, and was known in Elizabeth's time, another Elizabethan ballad having been set to the tune of it. This very house, wrote Samuel Pepys in June 1663 of Sir William Ryder's house at Bethnal Green, was built by the blind beggar of Bednall Green, so much talked of and sung in ballads, but they say it was only some outhouses of it. The angels that abounded in the beggar's stores were gold coins, so named from the figure on one side of the Archangel Michael overcoming the dragon. This coin was first struck in 1466, and it was used until the time of Charles I. The Bailiff's Daughter of Islington, or True Love Requited, is a ballad in Pepys's collection, now in the Bodleian. The Islington of the ballad is supposed to be an Islington in Norfolk. Barbara Allen's cruelty was referred to by Pepys in his diary, January 2nd, 1665-6, as the Little Scotch Song of Barbary Allen. It was first printed by Allan Ramsay in 1724 in his Tea Table Miscellany. In the same work, Allan Ramsay was also the first printer of Sweet William's Ghost. Fragments of the Braes o' Yarrow are in old collections. The ballad has been given by Scott in his Minstrelsy of the Border, and another version is in Peter Buchan's Ancient Ballads of the North. Kempo wine is here given from Buchan's Ballads of the North of Scotland. Here also Professor F. J. Child has pointed to many Icelandic, Danish, and German analogies. Allied to Kempo wine is the modern ballad of the Laidly Worm of Spindleston Hughes, written before 1778 by the Reverend Mr. Lamb of Narram. But the Laidly Worm and the Mackerel of the Sea is an older cousin to Kempo wine. O'er the Water to Charlie is given by Buchan as the original form of this one of the many songs made when Prince Charles Edward made his attempt in 1745-6. The songs worked scraps of lively old tunes, with some old words of ballad, into declaration of goodwill to the pretender. Admiral Hosier's Ghost was written by Richard Glover in 174 to rouse national feeling. Vice Admiral Vernon, with only 6 men of war, had taken the town of Portobello and leveled its fortifications. The place has so dangerous a climate that it is now almost deserted. Admiral Hosier in 1726 had been in the same port with 20 ships, restrained from attack, while he and his men were dying of fever. He was to blockade the Spanish ports in the West Indies and capture any Spanish galleons that came out. He left Portobello for Carthagena, where he cruised about while his men were being swept away by disease. His ships were made powerless through death of his best officers and men. He himself at last died, it was said, of a broken heart. Dyer's ballad pointed the contrast as a reproach to the government for half-hearted support of the war, and was meant for suggestion of the success that would reward vigorous action. Jemmy Dawson was a ballad written by William Shenstone on a young officer of Manchester Volunteers who was hanged, drawn, and quartered in 1746 on Kennington Common for having served the Pretender. He was engaged to a young lady, who came to the execution, and when it was over fell back dead in her coach. William and Margaret, by David Mallet, published in 1727, is another example of the tendency to the revival of the ballad in the 18th century. Elfinland Wood, by the Scottish poet William Motherwell, who died in 1835, aged 37, is a modern imitation of the ancient Scottish ballad. Mrs. Hemans, who wrote Casabianca, died also in 1835, but the last ballad in this bundle, Lady and Barnard's Auld Robin Grey, was written in 1771, and owes its place to a desire that this volume, which begins with the best of the old ballads, should end with the best of the new. Lady Anne, eldest daughter of the 5th Earl of Balcarres, married Sir Andrew Barnard, librarian to George III, and survived her husband 18 years. While the authorship of the piece remained a secret, there were some who attributed it to Rizzio, the favorite of Mary, Queen of Scots. Lady and Barnard acknowledged the authorship to Walter Scott in 1823, and told how she came to write it to an old heir of which she was passionately fond, bridegroom grat when the sun gied down, when she had heaped many troubles on her heroine, and called to a little sister to suggest another. The suggestion came promptly. Steal the cow, sister, and the cow was stolen.
Ash M.
Chevy Chase, the Percy out of Northumberland, and avowed a god made he that he would hunt in the mountains of Cheviot within days 3, in the maugre of doughty Douglas and all that ever with him be. The fattest hearts in all Cheviot he said he would kill and carry them away. By my faith, said the doughty Douglas again, I will let that hunting if that I may. Then the Percy out of Bamborough came, with him a mighty mean wife, with 1,500 archers, bold of blood and bone. They were chosen out of shires 3, This began on a Monday. At morn, in Cheviot, the hill is so high, the child may rue that is unborn. It was the more pity. The drivers thorough the woodies went for to raise the deer. Bowmen bickered upon the bent with their broad arrows clear. Then the wild thorough the woodies went on every city sheer. Greyhounds thorough the gravies glent for to kill their deer. This began in Cheviot, the hills abone, early on a Monday. By that it drew to the hour of noon 100 fat hearts dead there lay. They blew a mort upon the bent. They sembled on seedy sheer. To the quarry, then the Percy went, to see the britling of the deer. He said, it was the Douglas promised this day to meet me here. But I wist he would fail. Veriment, a great oath the Percy sware. At the last a squire of Northumberland looked, at his hand full nigh. He was ware of the doughty Douglas coming, with him a mighty meanwhile, both with spear,
bill,
and brand. It was a mighty sight to see. Hardier men both of heart nor hand were not in Christianty. They were 200 spearmen good without any fail. They were borne along by the water of Tweed. Ith bounds of Tividale. Leave off the britling of the deer, he said, and to your bows look ye take good heed, for never sith ye were of your mothers born, had ye never so mickle need. The doughty Douglas on a steed, he rode all his men beforn. His armor glittered as did a gleed. A bolder barn was never born. Tell me whose men ye are, he says, or whose men that ye be, who gave you leave to hunt in this Cheviot chase in the spite of mine and of me. The first man that ever him an answer made, it was the good Lord Perk. Why, we will not tell thee whose men we are, he says, nor whose men that we be, but we will hunt here in this chase in the spite of thine and of thee. The fattest hearts in all Cheviot we have killed, and cast to carry them away. By my troth, said the doughty Douglas again, therefore the tone of us shall die this day. Then said the doughty Douglas unto the Lord Perkwye, to kill all these guiltless men, alas, it were great pitwye. But, Percy, thou art a lord of land. I am an earl called within my country why. Let all our men upon a part one stand, and do the battle of thee and of me. Now Christ's curse on his crown, said the Lord Percy. Whosoever thereto says nay, by my troth, doughty Douglas, he says, thou shalt never see that day, neither in England, Scotland, nor France, nor for no man of a woman born, but and fortune be my chance, I dare meet him, one man for one. Then bespake a squire of Northumberland, Richard Witherington was his name. It shall never be told in South England, he says, to King Harry IV, for shame. I what you ben great lord, yes too. I am a poor squire of land. I will never see my captain fight on a field, and stand myself and look on, but while I may my weapon wield, I will fight both heart and hand. That day, that dreadful day, the first fit here, I find, and you will hear any more of the hunting of the Cheviot, yet is there more behind. Second fit, the English men had their bows abent, their hearts were good enow, the first of arrows that they shot off, 70 spearmen they slough. Yet bides the Earl Douglas upon the bent, a captain good enow, and that was seen veriment, for he wrought them both wa and wuff. The Douglas parted his host in three like a chieftain of pride. With sore spears of mighty tree they come in on every side. Through our English archery gave many a wound full wide. Many a doughty they guard to die, which gained them no pride. The Englishmen let their bows be, and pulled out brands that were bright. It was a heavy sight to see bright swords on basnets light. Thorough rich mail and maniple many stern they struck down straight. Many a freak that was full free there underfoot did light. At last the Douglas and the Percy met, like to captains of might and of main. They swapped together till they both swat, with swords that were of fine Milan. These worthy freckies for to fight thereto, they were full fain, till the blood out of their basnets sprent as ever did hail or rain. Yield thee, Percy, said the Douglas. And in faith I shall thee bring where thou shalt have an earl's woggies of jammy, our Scottish king. Thou shalt have thy ransom free. I hight thee here this thing, for the manfullest man yet art thou that ever I conquered in field fighting.
Nay,